Hello, I'm Monica Threlforth. I'm a lecturer and researcher here at London Metropolitan University, and I'm really happy to be able to take this opportunity of making the video that Troy Edu is doing for Black History Month to talk about my project, which is really about Caribbean slavery and the plantation memorials idea. Now, my first feeling that I want to communicate is that Black History Month isn't really just Black History Month, it's also British history that we're looking back on over a month, and it's everybody's history, every Briton's history that we're looking back at. And that is because, as I'll explain, I mean, we all know about slavery, but in particular we should remember British role in slavery, which was very prominent. In particular, for instance, a couple of some statistics, just a few. Britain authorized 10,000 voyages to West Africa to pick up, buy enslaved people. Voyages in ships that had to be specially adapted to fit in hundreds and hundreds of captured humans like sardines, literally. This went on for nearly 2.5 centuries, documented as 245 years, and all in all these ships managed to bring over nearly 3.5 million people enslaved. I'm not sure whether that's including the large proportion that died on the voyage across the Atlantic to the Americas. So 10,000 ships, 2.5 centuries, and 3.5 million people. Big numbers to remember. Now, on top of it, of course, as a result of that, Britain made vast fortune out of this business, not just of bringing the slaves over, but of then setting them to work in the sugar plantations, sometimes cotton plantations, throughout the British Caribbean. And it's not just the existing elite ship owners, great merchants, grand landowners who profited from this. It was really all Britons in one way or another, closely or a bit more distantly. Because remember that it was middle income people, low income people, and those trying to escape the threat of poverty and indigence who actually, of their own accord, went out to the Caribbean or got jobs on the ships, but went out more particularly to the Caribbean to set themselves up as landowners and exploiters of enslaved labour. Even then, though despite the death penalty and much less protection of human rights, but clearly it was known that Britons are all human beings with a life that has to be protected and legally recognised as such. And it was perfectly clear that Britons were not the same as a donkey or a cow that you could work to death, and who cared? So that's what they could do in the Caribbean with the enslaved. So quite a different, not very honourable proposition. So we're talking about a shameful period of British history. I should also add that Britain wasn't the only power engaged in this brutal trade. Other European powers were too, such as France, but even the least expected, such as Denmark. They at least bought the slaves when they arrived in the Caribbean, even if they didn't have the ships that actually got them from Africa. And of course there was an Islamic slave trade going on in Africa itself, providing slaves for anybody from the centre of the interior of the West African continent for the Islamic Empire, that stretched across North Africa and the Middle East. Now, why am I part of these ordinary Britons who in some way are linked to this? It's because I made a discovery rather recently that there was a woman called Elizabeth Threlfall who came from the same Lancashire village that I can trace my ancestry to. Although being a Miss Threlfall, I'm not a direct descendant. She had no children. Now she, in about 1803, became the owner of 4 plantations in the Caribbean, given to her by her uncle, a vicar, the Reverend Braithwaite. And instead of setting these aside, saying, "What? I can't have anything to do with this," she said, "Okay, yes, let's go ahead." And she sailed off to the Caribbean to set herself up as a plantation owner, slave owner, and to make a go of it. She failed, by the way, but that's another story. So an ordinary person thinks this is the way to enrich oneself and increase her standing in society, which she did. So now again, is this all just part of history and I've dug up something to do with my old ancestry, which is just a tiny little minute in history? No, it's all there now. I've been back to a couple of islands where she had her plantations, and the location is there. The plantation name still exists. It refers to the same area, Seacow Bay, and there's a road running through it called, to my surprise, Threlfall's Road. The very same name. Even though, of course, nowadays Threlfall's Road takes you up to a rather desirable new development of villas and is, referred to by estate agents as a desirable location. It is the same old Seacow Bay plantation. Equally, on another island, St. John, the plantations are still there. The area has got the same name, Bordeaux, but significantly it is being squatted by local inhabitants of the island who are descendants of the enslaved peoples who were brought over from Africa and forced to work on that plantation, and now they're living on it, squatting, refusing to leave, and of course refusing to pay any type of property tax because their ancestors were forced to work there, liberated but given no land rights. And so who would blame them? But the point is, this is all happening now. And therefore there's a direct link between now and the past. So I feel we should face up to this, and one way of doing it is not just remembering, but also there's something one can do to provide, to return back some information and to provide something that some locals, residents, want. And I'm referring to archives. Not a sexy term, but it's a sexy story because, as it happens, Britain, when it decolonized the Caribbean islands and they became independent nations, actually took away all the archives up to the 1950s and 60s when decolonization occurred. So they have no recent past, they have only recent past. Only recent past documents are local there. Where are the rest? In London. And what do we want from these archives? Well, there's one particular set of documents which is online, but nevertheless very complicated to actually use. And these documents are referred to as the slave registers. These were documents that the abolitionists pressured the British government at the time to start drawing up in about 1810, 1814, in order, as an abolitionist intended, for them to recognize all these slaves as individual human beings. Since the trade was abolished, they had to be recognized as individual human beings. And so we find lists of names of slaves, such as on Mr. Elford's plantation, nearly 200 names with details, little details about them. But these registers were done 6 times over. So if you piece them together over 20 years, you often get a little story about each individual slave, which actually doesn't exist anywhere else. So it's a unique source of still new information, because many of these registers have hardly been used. There's 5,000 pages of them, because there were thousands of slaves, tens of thousands. And as a result, what I've come up with is an idea together, which I have to say was born in a conversation with the local MP for Sea Cow Bay on Tortola and the British Virgin Islands, who was called Julian Fraser, who expressed a great interest that there should be a link, at least, if not a sort of increased access to these documents, which list people from the area he was born and currently represents. So that is the Plantation Memorial is the way of creating this link. On the one hand, you have people here in the UK with or without ancestry, maybe just namesakes of the planters, of course, are the ones who profited so much, who can provide good photographs, good high quality photographs of the old documents. They look very authentic, and then also do the work of transcribing to make it more legible and piecing together 6 examples of information over a 20-year period into these mini stories. And of course, this all depends who wants it. It has to be done only with communities in Caribbean islands, countries who want it, either very local communities or schools or whoever, individually or in groups, thinks this is a good idea. If they don't think it's a good idea, it must not happen. But there's a huge amount of possibilities here, because some don't, some will. And so I suggest that these registers with their stories of individuals. By the way, you know, I found some who are still alleged to have born in Africa, who are in their 60s and 70s, and who die just before abolition. Isn't that a tragedy? Or die afterwards, in other words, become liberated, which is also an extraordinary, to spend 60 years and then become liberated. And I think that the memorial can be, you know, something modest. It doesn't have to be very expensive. It can be like a church notice board, or a plaque, metal plaque, or ceramic, or something freestanding. That depends on individuals. So I'm involved in this, and if anybody wants to know more, please contact me. I can give you the know-how of how to get started, whether you're an individual or a school. It's not very difficult. You don't need a lot of people. And if anybody has connections with the British Virgin Islands and would like to help out with the memorial I'm currently working on, do please join me. I've got work for you to do. I need some help with the website, some fundraising, and of course the flights, probably the most expensive bit. So do get in touch. I hope to hear from you, and thank you. Bye.